Coming up on the next episode of Painting and Travel, Roger and Sarah Bansemer visit the Auburn Dusenberg Museum. Sarah takes us on a private tour through the collection as Roger paints a fabulous 1931 cord.
You may feel as though you've entered a grand hotel of the 1930s with beautiful Art Deco interior and a terrazzo floor from Italy. However, this building was actually made as the headquarters for the Auburn Duesenberg factory. And the guests here now are over 100 cars, many beautifully restored, some built from scratch, and we'll have a chance to meet some up close. This is the famous J model Duesenberg, built in 1930. It's really spectacular. Take a close look. I see Roger has already set his easel up over there at that 1931 cord. Let's go over and take a look.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Raj. I feel like a kid in a candy store here. There's so many beautiful cars. How are you going to choose just one?
I don't know. There are so many cars. I'm sitting in front of this 31 cord, and I think I'm going to try and do a small painting of it this morning. It's colorful, but I also think it has a magnificent sense of design to it. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. I know you have an appointment to see the rest of the museum.
Yes, I do. So we'll catch up with you a little later on while you're setting up the rest of your materials.
That sounds good. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
The museum opened its doors in 1974 for the first time, July of that year, and has since welcomed over almost 2 million people through its doors from all 50 states and 40 foreign countries. The museum's a National Historic Landmark, one of only 2 in northeastern Indiana. And it's in this building that automotive history was made. Many of the cars that you see here at the Auburn Duesenberg Automobile Museum were designed, engineered, and sold throughout this in this building in the early 1930s. And it was here that many fine cars like the Auburn Boattail Speedster, the Cord 810 and 812 were both designed and produced by the different draftsmen and artisans that were on the staff of the Auburn Automobile Company, and of course, the mighty Duesenberg Model J.
Would that be this beauty?
Yes, that would be this beauty. The Duesenberg Model J is considered America's greatest luxury car of all time, and there was only about 481 of these cars ever made. People like Hollywood actors, actresses, kings, queens of countries would own a Duesenberg Model J. This car was about $20,000 new in 1932. That could get you about 40 Fords at the time. Basically a custom coach, if you will. They would get a rolling chassis, and the rolling chassis would then be sent to the coach builder, and they would actually build the body to the specs of the buyer. So no 2 Duesenbergs are alike.
I didn't know that. That's amazing. Each one like a work of art.
Definitely. Rolling sculptures, if you will.
Rolling sculptures. I love it. Let's see what else we can find.
Here we have a 1935 Auburn 851 boat-tailed speedster. This car was designed here in this building by a gentleman by the name of Gordon Burig.
Boat-tailed?
Boat-tailed, yes. If you look at the back of the car, it comes down into a little tail, and it looks like the upside down of the hull of a boat.
Yes, it does.
This car in particular was the styling craze of 35. It has become a classic more than 70 years after it was designed.
It is fabulous. I feel like I'm walking through the Hall of the Great Masters.
Well, you're close, definitely.
Each car is a work of art, isn't it? This must be the Frank Lloyd Wright 1929 Cord L29 you mentioned earlier.
Oh, definitely. This car is very colorful, as you can see. This right here was America's first front-wheel drive production automobile.
Really?
Built and designed right here in Auburn, Indiana. This car was originally owned by the great Frank Lloyd Wright. It was originally Taliesin orange, color he's known for. Matter of fact, he loved the innovation and the mechanics and the idea behind front-wheel drive that he actually wrote about it in his biography. He liked the idea of, the power being in the front and pulling the weight rather than in the back pushing the weight. So he's a big fan of the Cord L29. He owned two, matter of fact.
Gran, it looks like this was built specifically to be a racing car.
Oh, and you'd be correct. That's the 1927 Duesenberg race car. Duesenberg won 3 of 4 Indianapolis 500s between 1924 and 1927. It was also the first American race car to win the French Grand Prix at Le Mans. And believe it or not, it beat second place by over 15 minutes.
Gosh, that's an awful lot these days.
Oh, you bet.
And the driver sat here, of course, in the extra seat?
That was for the mechanic. Back in those days, you had a driver, you had a mechanic, and believe it or not, the most mechanics would actually graduate up to a driver at some point. So, yeah, it's not like today. You had 2 people per car.
Gosh, amazing. I see that this is a 1904 Auburn.
Yes.
Next to a carriage, and there is some relationship here. What is it?
Oh, definitely. Well, that carriage over there is a 1900 Eckerd carriage from the Eckerd Carriage Company. And the Eckerd Carriage Company is really the foundation for what the Auburn Automobile Company was founded on. And it was that company from which the Auburn Automobile Company was created. Now here, of course, you have a 1904 Auburn, and you can kind of tell within 4 years how the company and transportation, for that matter, had evolved. During this time, you had a lot of carriage builders that was taking their carriages and strapping a 1- and 2-cylinder engine on it and creating a horseless carriage. And as you can see, within 4 years, a lot of different features came and really added to the motoring experience to the public.
It's really attractive. It's got the brass and wood, and these look like they might have been hanging on a train or in a barn at some point.
Those are gas headlamps. This was really the only real way of seeing at night. Back then, when you owned a horseless carriage, as they called it, you had to be not only the driver, but the mechanic and operator all at the same time. They didn't exactly have tow trucks back in those days.
No, I guess not. No AAA.
No.
Gran, I read earlier that this is a recreation. What happened to the original?
Well, the original actually was destroyed in a fire at the 1929 Los Angeles Auto Show.
Ooh.
Yes, this is a 1929 Auburn cabin speedster. It was a unique car, very unique. There was a big fire that destroyed 320 cars that year in the auto show. The auto show is a huge exhibit. It was held under a large tent, and unfortunately, when the tent caught on fire, it destroyed all the cars that were at the show that year. This car, though, in '83, was developed and built by a car enthusiast by the name of Peter Kessling.
I noticed this wooden shell. Is this the interior of this?
No, that's an example of coachwork. Believe it or not, whenever you would bring a rolling chassis, instead of having a metal body to start with, a lot of the bodies during this period of time started out as a wooden body, and then they would actually apply the sheet metal to that and so kind of solder it and kind of fill in the gaps, if you will. So a lot of these amazing machines that you see here actually have a little bit of Mother Nature underneath the metal.
Well, it must have taken a number of different craftsmen good at different fields of engineering to put these together.
Oh, you bet.
Well, Gran, as we stroll down luxury car lane, I want to thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. 120 cars, 3 different floors. Glad you could stop by and see a few of them.
Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
Oh, my pleasure.
Okay, bye-bye.
This really is an incredible museum, as you can see, and I feel like I'm among some real master works here, which I am. So in a way, I feel a little bit maybe incompetent to paint something like this. But in other ways, if I paint a tree in nature, it's that's also a masterpiece. So I'm just going to continue on. I put this drawing on here, and since I wanted it to have it quite accurate, what I did was I took a photograph of this automobile. I blackened the back of this with some soft pencil. Then I just put this drawing up here, and I simply traced the lines in here. Now, in some ways, some people may say that it's cheating. I sometimes hear that. Now, I could just draw this freehand, and it would probably take me a good bit of time, maybe a half hour or so, to get it as accurately as I can. So it's simply a good shortcut, especially when I have some time restraints in a museum like this, and I want to get it accurate. There is no substitute for drawing. Well, there is a substitute. This is a substitute. But there is no substitute for understanding drawing and perspective. And I often carry a sketchbook with me, and I made a few sketches in the museum earlier. I certainly don't want to diminish the importance of drawing in any way. This is simply a little bit quicker way I can get down to work here. I'm only using a few brushes today, just a few flat brushes and one pointed brush. I'm using acrylics today, as I usually do, and I've put out a few colors on my palette, including titanium white, naphthol red, alizarin crimson, olive green, cerulean blue, burnt umber, yellow ochre, and cadmium yellow. So, I have my water with me. I have my little spray atomizer with me. That keeps things wet. And we'll get started. I'm going to tone this board just a little bit. Let me spray it with some water so I can just get a thin wash on here. And this should dry very quickly. I just want to eliminate that white. Smooth that out just a little bit. I want to leave some texture in there. Mix a little cerulean blue and burnt umber here. And maybe just darken this under here. Put that shadow in there. This museum, of course, is open to the public, so everything echoes in here, so we may hear a few guests as they walk by. Years ago, I owned a 1931 Model A Ford. It was my first car. It was almost the same color yellow as that. I think I want to try and get this fairly flat. I don't want to put any highlights in there yet. Good thing it's light color, because adding white to things always makes your paint opaque. And this will help me to cover this a little bit easier. Naphthol red, cadmium yellow light. That should, ooh, what a beautiful red. This may go a little bit quicker than I thought, because there's really not a lot of detail here. It's basically great big shapes I'm working with. I'm painting on Masonite today. This is just 1/8" Masonite primed with gesso. It gives a very smooth, nice surface to paint on. I occasionally like to paint on canvas, but a small piece like this, I prefer to paint on something a little bit smoother. It's important to have good brushes, especially when painting something architectural like this. An old brush that's beat up, that doesn't have a good sharp edge on it, would be difficult to use in something like that. And even though this is quite a large brush here, I can get a very fine point with it by just putting it on its side like this. And that gives me a nice sharp line. These large white wall tires are fascinating, but they're not totally white in here. So I'm going to mix up a little cerulean blue and burnt umber, gray these down somewhat. This background color already gives me a gray, but I can't just leave that because this has a texture to it. I like the texture back here. It's going to make a nice contrast with these flatter areas up here. Years ago, I painted many billboards, and I was painting an automobile on a billboard. A little boy came up below the billboard and asked me, what color do I paint the chrome? And I'll never forget that. Good question. But things like chrome here are really made up primarily of reflections around it. Really glad I brought some new brushes with me today, because without these good brushes I would be hard pressed to get a good line, which is what I'm looking for here on this. Well, as long as I got my chrome color out here, might as well work on this headlight. Of course, we're inside, so the chrome is going to look much different in here than it would outside, where it would be reflecting the sky. Squinting my eyes when I look at this headlamp here, and of course right in here there's a major reflection of the fender, so we'll primarily use a red color down there but make it a little bit darker. It's a very unusual headlight. I think only the Cords had that style headlamp for a while. I'm not sure how it worked very effectively. It was so narrow at the front. There's often a discrepancy when I paint in what I actually see and what I actually paint. And I think that comes from not only my upbringing and just training and that sort of thing, but so often that happens with painters because I have a notion of what something is supposed to look like or what color is supposed to be. A simple example would be, the grass is green and the sky is blue. So when I paint chrome like this, I think I'm automatically thinking to myself, it's got to be blue because it's reflecting the sky. When in fact in here, it's not at all blue. I'm not seeing any blue, but I just naturally went for it and I painted it. And that is a real problem for me at times, because when I catch myself doing that, I realize I'm not seeing clearly. I'm just not focused in on what I'm looking at. I'm using my head more than my eyes. It can be a problem, and other times it can work out well. It's sort of a balancing act that an artist must play in order to create a good painting. Sometimes I hold my breath when I'm doing those lines that need to be accurate. And these aren't terribly accurate right now. So obviously when I get back to the studio, I'll have this to use as a little more detail too. So if I don't finish it right now, I'll have some reference. These acrylics often just don't cover very well on the first go around. I very often have to give these things a second coat. Just put a little indication in there that there's some glass there. As I said before, this needs to be quite flat in here, and the first coat of that just didn't cover well enough. So I'm going to give this one more go around. And as I do on this time, I'm going to try and look for a little more subtleties in here with the color. And I'll put it on thick enough where it may stay wet for a few minutes, and I can blend some other colors into it. One color affects another color so very much in painting that even though maybe my eyes don't perceive it as well as they should, I know this red fender is reflecting on this yellow hood. So in just a moment, I'm going to pick up a little bit of red and add it in there. Naphthol red. Don't want to get too much in there, but maybe I'll just put a little bit right in there. See? There. Just gives that a little bit of association with the fender and so on. And in the fender, the same way, I'm going to put a little bit of yellow in here because all that light bounces back and forth. And that's one thing that gives a painting unity, is this relationship of all the colors. And that's pretty subtle. It doesn't really show very much, but it doesn't have to show very much. It's just enough to let the eye or the brain say, yeah, these things belong together. But if it weren't there, it might be more noticeable that something is wrong with it, but you can't really tell what it is. As long as I'm working on this yellow here, pick a little more white up, cadmium yellow. We've got a few beautiful bright highlights right down here. And I'll put those in a few minutes, but this will need to dry a little bit first. I see a couple other highlights down here. I don't know where they're coming from because we're in this building, so a lot of things are getting reflected off of here. Now, as I squint my eyes, I notice that this down here is quite a bit darker than this up here. I've got a nice shadow here from this headlight, so I'm going to maybe let this dry just a moment or two, and I'll darken this a little bit more, try and give that a little more form. Just keep bouncing back and forth between these elements here. So I'll get back to this tire, highlight across the top of that. Now, so far I've used a pretty large brush for this whole thing, but I think maybe in a few moments I'll get a smaller brush and start a few more details. There's these beautiful highlights right up here. I think it's time to clean off my palette a bit here. I have to be careful I don't get any paint anywhere. Even when I'm outside, I don't leave paint on the ground. So let me just scrape a little of this paint off. And I have a little cardboard box. Just put that in the cardboard box. Now it's time to start defining some of these shapes a little bit better. This is one of the beauties of acrylics, is that they dry so rapidly that I can go in and put other colors over this without having them mix and get muddy. It's also a disadvantage in some instances. Depends on what you get used to. Yellow ochre, cadmium yellow light. I'll mix that with a little bit of the naphthol red. Make an orange color. And we'll put a little highlight on the top of this fender. Yeah, that ties these two pieces into each other just by the mere fact that the light is reflecting back and forth. I don't think I even need to soften that very much. I'll just keep that a nice sort of a hard reflection. And there's some other hard reflections here made by these overhead lights. And I may just try and touch one or two of those in here. Now down here on the side of the fender, we're not getting any of the reflection from this yellow. So any reflection on the fender down here is going to be from another color source. And it's actually coming from the windows, but I'm going to mix up some cerulean blue and white, and I'll use that as a reflection color, or a highlight color, I should say. It helps me a little bit to see these reflections better if I squint my eyes again too. So I'm constantly squinting my eyes as I look at this automobile. Some nice highlights on this headlamp. Here on the grill we have a little bit of red too, so get that touched in there. Yeah, I'm using my little fine pointed brush now, touching these details. Here's a tool I don't use very often, a ruler, but on something like this it comes in handy. Make that line right in there. I'm only going to suggest a few of these spokes. I notice my wheel here isn't quite round, and that's something that can more easily be finished back in my studio, where I have a little more control over things. Make this tire a little bit, this roundness of this tire is bothering me. I'm going to add this little bit darker shadow down here. I don't want to get this wet, so I'll just hold my hand in front of this. Just spray down there. Spraying this with water gave me the opportunity to keep these edges very soft. don't think I want too much of a shadow under there. I'll kind of like the idea of keeping this as more along the lines of an illustration. There are some beautiful details in here. I can still see my pencil lines through there, so when I do trace anything or draw anything on my board, I always draw my pencil lines quite dark, because I know as I put my paint over here, the pencil lines can easily disappear. As I do these, I put one hand over the other like this, and that gives me a nice steady platform. I think I've taken this painting about as far as I can here at the museum. It's getting pretty crowded in here now, but it's been a real privilege to sit here amongst these masterpieces and paint today. I'll take this back to the studio, add a few more details, figure out in my mind what I want to do to complete this. I'll sign it, varnish it, we'll put a frame on it, and we'll see what the end result looks like.
Gran, this looks like a very powerful engine. What is it?
Oh, you bet. It's a Duesenberg Model J power plant. It's a Duesenberg Model J engine. This right here in 1932 was the most powerful engine on the planet. Duesenberg is known for their luxury, but they're also known for their speed. That's why in second gear, you could get close to 100 miles an hour, if you can believe that.
That should do it.
For more information about painting and travel with Roger and Sarah Bansemer, visit paintingandtravel.com.